Dan, I will call on you to answer some questions a little later because Dennis already knows the spiel, or he's seen it a few times. A little bit about me. I guess I should introduce myself. After I graduated with my MBA from UCLA, I went to work for Glendale Federal Savings and then for an economics and consulting firm. And then I was in Fullerton for 16 years, just down the hill from Hughes Ground Systems. And then I went to DirecTV and then to Home Savings, where I was vice president and manager of information quality. And then to Experian. It looks like I can't hold down a job, doesn't it? And then I ended up at Loma Linda University, and I am on faculty now at Loma Linda University. I finished up my career at ADP. So here are the occupants of the White House in context, or if you prefer, the sunspot cycle, or the price of crude oil. Anyway, that's some context. I lecture all over the country, and people ask, where is Loma Linda? And I tell them 34 North, 117 West. And they say, oh, yes, which is data, but not information. So it's meaningless to most people. But if I wrap some context around that, namely a map, then they can kind of picture where it is. And I can say we're 60 miles east of Los Angeles, but most Californians think in terms of drive time. So we're an hour east of Los Angeles, except on Friday nights when we're 2.5 hours east of Los Angeles. And that's what I look like giving blood. This is kind of a little jab. Oh, that's a bad pun. If you're healthy and you can, I encourage people to donate blood. I do every 56 days. I'm O negative, CMV negative, and they really want me. And I always bring something to read while I'm donating blood. Okay, the key takeaways here is that communication, particularly under a stressful situation, requires both technology and semantics. And so when you're passing along a message from a client, a customer, not a message you made up, but from a customer, what was meant in the brain of the sender and what was understood in the brain of the recipient may be two different things. And the message goes through two layers, the semantic layer and the technology layer. And I'm going to talk a lot about the semantic layer. So communication isn't complete until it's understood by the recipient. In other words, what you say may not be what they hear. So they have to correctly understand what you meant to say. So using this little schematic of the two layers, the technology layer includes the text of the message, and so that's and the environment, the bandwidth, the signal strength, the channel saturation, and technical noise. Whereas the semantics of the message involves the meaning. Why is it important? What's the cultural and situational context of the message? Are there shared values, shared culture from the sender to the recipient that you may or may not know if you're passing this along? And of course, then there's cultural or situational distractions. So most of our clients in government or hospitals, and I'm mainly talking about hospital, because this has come from the Orange County Hospital disaster communication system. Most of our clients are used to universal coverage. Yeah, there's complex technology in the infrastructure, but the reliability is taken for granted. They always can hear each other clearly. And yeah, the gadgets get more complex, and society hasn't been greatly helped by ringtones, but they're there. But the main Bell telephone network remains vulnerable to outages. And so a modern telephone communication is what we call full duplex. There's two simultaneous paths of our audio. Both parties can interrupt each other. Both parties can read each other's tone of voice. And that's very important in communication. So if there's a problem in a hospital, and let's say someone up in one of the wards calls central supply, and they're not talking until the phone rings. And so alerting the one party that there's an incoming call is a great feature of the traditional telephone. And Marcia recognizes his voice. John, this is Marcia in ER. We need some 4-inch gauze here right away. And he responds, I can get you 3-inch gauze right now. And she responds, well, that might, but he interrupts her and says, I can give you 4-inch gauze in an hour. And she says, great. So that was the dialogue. And what were the characteristics of that phone call? There was voice recognition, and familiarity yields a spirit of cooperation. Both could hear each other's tone of voice, her urgency and his understanding, and they could interrupt each other. Wonderful feature, which you don't have on amateur radio, as far as I recall. And there's a faster dialogue. And in fact, what happened was a creative solution, unanticipated when the conversation started. So if we draw a block diagram of that conversation, it's pretty simple, continuous audio. Now watch what happens when the phones go down, the PBX fails, and the hams get involved. And we distribute hams around the hospital. And so John has a message and Marcia is the recipient. They are both employees of the hospital. They have a common lexicon and values and experience. But we're going to, they can't talk to each other, so it has to go through a radio channel. And so there are 2 amateur radio operators involved. And John passes a message, either spoken or written out, to N6ABC, and then he will communicate it to W2KRQ. The problem is it's over a radio channel with noise, net control, and other traffic. So that is the technical layer of the communication, and that is the semantic layer of the communication. And many hams, I don't know about, I should be careful what I say here, but many hams think technology is all there is to communication. But the meaning and the semantics of the message is very important, especially in a disaster situation where everybody is stressed out. So radio is I can't read the top of my screen, but that's it's not the best form of communication. Messages must be formalized. They pass through many steps and eyes and ears, and thus there's more opportunity for error. There's no tone of voice with the words, no ability to interrupt. It's not great, but it's better than no communication at all. So sometimes in supporting a disaster situation, we have to resort to a telegram kind of format. And this is not unlike the radiograms and the formal forms that ARRL use. I don't know if they still use it, but they did a long time ago. And it's kind of like a telegram. So there's a to and a from, and we need 4-inch gauze immediately. And then there's this long silence before they get a response. and the response from central supply could be no 4-inch gauze available, or to ER central, we will send it tomorrow, which is not a satisfactory response to the situation communicated from the ER. So, and I'm old fashioned. I don't call it the ED, the emergency department. I call it the emergency room. So, but it was an inferior form of communication. We lost the verbal component. I've already said this. It's not an ideal situation. So there are some people that we've experienced that say, oh no, the hams are going to get involved. And I don't know if you can see this little animation, but this is the traditional view of an amateur radio station late at night, throwing a radio signal out into the ether. Or this is a ham with a improperly tuned final. But there's a myth that we've observed that a ham with a kilowatt can do anything, but the communication has to take place in some cultural and knowledge context, and that's why we had the hospital disaster support communication system in Orange County. So what we did, and we had about 80 amateur radio operators coming to the meetings, we enabled them to do error checking through better knowledge of the meaning and context of the situation. So we educated them about a mass casualty situation and about some basic hospital and healthcare lexicon and vocabulary that gives them better understanding of the context of the messages they are passing. So I have this formula that I use in a lot of my talks for professional groups, and it's data plus context yields information. So the data, the text of the message, plus context helps us understand the meaning of the message. And context can be cultural and technical, and that's the business technical, not the radio technical, and lingual and values and patterns of behavior. That's in the work setting, and the work setting, of course, is a hospital, or it could be a fire department. Here's a very crude example of a piece of data, and that's actually a message, a very accurate message, 25, but without any context around it, it's not going to be terribly useful. So instead of using words to define that 25, I'm going to use graphics to define it. And now, given the graphical context, it suddenly becomes more meaningful and becomes very useful. And the message is basically slow down, because for some reason, that 25 on a sign, generally, our experience tells us that is a speed limit. So here's another example of data without context, and it's difficult. Some of you may recognize the structure and say, you know what that is. But if I give graphic context around that, we know that the last three numbers are runs, hits, and errors in baseball. So the definition is much more understandable. But what happened was we brought our own experience to that data and as it's expressed, and we understand the context. Now, context is sometimes supplied by peer data or other data points. For example, if we are passing along a message that the air temperature this noon at Parker was 74 degrees, and if we know that the temperatures up and down the Colorado River are much higher, we are going to be suspicious of that 74 degrees at Parker. And we may not pass that data along as a message if we don't think that that is right, given the context. So I teach workshops in data quality for database designers, and I say I teach skepticism, help them spot things that don't look right. So while we can't verify the temperature at Parker, but given the context of other readings, we may reasonably suspect that that data is wrong. So what we teach the hams in the hospital group is, if you're not sure about something, question it, go back to the source and reconfirm the text. This is a protocol that's slightly different than some of the traditional amateur radio procedures. Therefore, does the text message look reasonable in the context of not only what your understanding is, but what you've heard on the channel with the rest of the situation, the rest of the mass casualty incident or things like that. Now, noise can be cultural, and I'm throwing a bunch of abbreviations at you, but somewhere buried in there is a request for help. And unless I point it out to you, you're going to be distracted by all the other text. But if I give it some emphasis, then you will say, oh, there was a request for help there. Here is another way of expressing that. A lot of 6-digit numbers, but buried in there is a request for help. So that is what I call cultural noise. And also, Dan, unmute, because I want you to tell me what you read in this triangle. Are you ready?
Okay, I'm ready.
What do you see?
Bird in the hand.
That's what you thought you saw. Read it again.
Bird in the hand.
You're really stuck on your cultural memory.
Yes.
Read it again.
Read every word, Dan.
There's two does. Bird in the hand.
Right. You made a leap based on your personal experience of what it said, but that's not what it said. Thank you, Dan.
Not a problem.
So our cultural background helps us spot errors. For example, if you looked at all these words, and let's say these were in some kind of message that we were passing along by hand, and I fully realize that we're modern technology, we're sending a lot more digital information, but if we had to do this by voice, a lot of us would not understand these words or spot the problem, even if I emphasized that the first letter of each word is missing. And these happen to be major cities in Mexico. So I don't have the cultural context to detect that problem in the messages. But if you see a string of words that are spelled like this, and they are recognizable to most Americans, and you would say, ah, the first character has been truncated from all of these. In fact, a lot of folk who have been in industry will recognize the 3-character abbreviations for the same cities that we see on our luggage tags. So that if you've traveled a lot, you are learning context for communication. Here is a 2-character abbreviation. What does it mean? Well, in that context, it means the state of Maryland. But in this context, it's going to mean medical doctor or physician. And so the context helps us understand abbreviations that are ambiguous without that context. So the cultural experience helps you recognize both in format and context of normal messages. And I'm going to kill a bug that's crawling across my keyboard here. But it also allows you to deduce its meaning. Now we have one of the problems with medications is when you say 500, it's ambiguous. 500 units, grams, drams is another pharmaceutical unit of magnitude, or milligrams or bottles. What if a message comes along to the pharmacy and it doesn't include a unit of measure, it's incomplete. We can't assume that both parties are in agreement as to what the unit of measure is. So we want to spell that out in messages. There are all when we're passing along messages verbally or by mouth, there are all kinds of homonyms that we may not be able to clarify. For example, SNL may mean savings and loan, at least it did when I was a kid, or it could mean Saturday Night Live. They sound the same. If we don't see them printed out, if we're passing them over an audio channel, they sound the same. In a hospital situation, CNS could mean culture and sensitivity, which is a request for the clinical lab, or it could mean central nervous system, as there's a problem with this patient. And so even the mere format of data can imply the definition. So if we were all in the same room, everybody would recognize this as month, day, year, or Y2K compliant month, day, year. This may stump some people, but if I put some characters around it, you'd say that looks like a phone number. What does this look like, Dan? I'm going to pick on you because you're at the top. Oh, I'll pick on Barry.
Oh yeah, pick on Barry. Pick on Barry. He's a good one.
What does this look like?
It looks like some office windows to me.
Oh, you're not playing the game.
I'm trying to figure out what it is. It's a minus something.
It's a zip +4.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, if we were in the same room, I'd throw a piece of candy at you. How about this, Barry?
Oh, God.
How about this?
I have no idea.
City, state, zip.
Okay, if your city is that long.
Doesn't matter. If it's a form, we make provision for really long city names.
Okay.
And what about this?
Name.
First, middle, and last name.
Good. Okay, your score is going up. How about this, Barry?
Ooh. I would say serial number, maybe.
Oh, come on. Does anyone else make purchases for you? It's a credit card number with expiration date. So, yeah, some people recognize that structure. And we bring our culture to interpreting symbols. For example, if you've never flown, this would not seem funny to you. Or this. Or this. Or this. If you've never stayed in a high-rise hotel, you bring your experience to that and you say, oh, I can relate to that. So we bring our cultural context, in fact, a lifetime of experience, to metaphors and figures of speech. For example, he bought the farm is not a real estate transaction. A few ants short of a picnic is not a description of a meal. Or a few fries short of a Happy Meal. I love that expression. So the context gives meaning to raw data. Let's let's let Barry do this one too. What's the message? You don't have a clue. No,
No.
Let me take away some of the fog.
Now I do.
What is it?
It looks like a church steeple.
So what's the message?
One if I land, two if I see, and
Okay.
I am sure will be.
Actually, you just gave me the code. One light, the British are coming by land. Two lights, the British are coming by sea. How about no lights? What does that mean? I don't know yet, or my matches got wet, or I already sent the message and went off to bed. So this introduces another concept that we have to be aware of in communication, and that is the null condition, the absence of a message. What does silence mean? And it could mean a whole lot of things. Okay, so let's say that there's an earthquake in Smallville, and we get a phone call that there's a fire at 4th and Elm. And then we get another phone call that there's a fire at 3rd and Willow. And so what's the big picture? Two fires? Well, what we may not know is about the silence, that there are fires all over the center of town, but the telephone exchange went down and they have no way of calling for help. So we can't assume that silence is okay. Our phones haven't rung, so everything must be okay. What we did, and the hospital group in Orange County was an ARES group. We were trained not to wait for someone to ask for help, but if there was an earthquake, we either call our hospital to which we are assigned, or we actually, sometimes if we can't get through, we drive over there to see if they're all right. We call this decentralized activation. And there's a lot of great stories about silence being interpreted as okay. So, one aspect of message theory is the more options to the message, the larger the code must be. And so here's a challenge for amateur radio operators, is keeping the message brief. Can the message be truncated without loss of correct meaning? So there's tension between these two goals, clarity and brevity. And there was one wonderful example back in the 19th century where a playwright had to travel to Vienna from Paris, and his play was making a premiere in Paris, and he was very poor, and the telegraph agency charged by the character. So he sent a single character query to his agent back in Paris about the success of the play. And the agent, being prudent and frugal, sent back a one character response about the play. But they communicated. It was brief, but they knew the context. They knew what was going on. So the detail plus the context contributes to the big picture. Even if you're not saying anything on the channel, if you listen long enough, you can kind of pick up the big picture. And I've sat in a hospital conference room, which was the command post for the hospital, as they're bringing in mass casualty incidences. And this was especially true for the Placentia train wreck. And eventually, and I'm wearing an earphone, so I don't want to disrupt the conversations at the table. But eventually they look at me and say, this guy knows what's going on. What's happening? How many casualties are out there? How many are being sent to other hospitals? They want to get a better handle on the big picture. Now, that's the end of the short version, but I've got a lot more, and I'm going to go, since we don't have an intermission, I'm going to go ahead and talk about a little bit more about the structure of messages that we would pass. There are three kinds of messages: a declarative sentence, an imperative sentence, which we learned in English class was a command, and questions. Generally, a query expects an answer in return. So declarative sentences, who are we telling to, who needs to know this message or this piece of information? Do we have any idea what they will do with the information? Is the sentence only a form of catharsis? And we've had one ham at outside the emergency room, very excited about watching a helicopter land, and so he filled up the channel with his expressions of excitement. Watch. Well, we don't need to know that. That's not central to the service we are providing our customers, who are the medical professionals and the fire department. Is any confidentiality being breached by that declarative sentence? And is it time dependent? Will it decay over time? A lot of data decays over time. A command or an imperative sentence, is it specific and clear? Is it time limited? Will it expire? Some requests for somebody doing something may expire if it doesn't get to the intended recipient. Is it conditional in any way? I just can picture them saying, forget it, never mind, I'll do it myself. Is it so specific as to limit the options of the actor? And then we have the interrogatory, the question. Are the terms ambiguous? I love this. Call the other hospital and ask what their status is. Well, what do you mean by status? Is the question answerable? Is the answer knowable? Like, when will this drill be over? Drills tend to last much longer than we had anticipated. Is it clear who the question is directed to? And what is the need that triggered the question in the first place? And what kind of answer is expected? And when is the answer expected? So that's part of the business context or the situational context of sending a query over the channel. So there are two clients for amateur radio traffic, and there's traffic among the communications team, and there's traffic for your real client. So at the start of a mass casualty drill or after an earthquake, there's a lot of chatter on the channel saying, I'm on my way to West Med Anaheim, or I'm getting positioned, or I've been here 5 hours. Can you send somebody to give me relief? Or changing frequencies. We're getting better coverage on a different repeater. Whereas traffic for your clients, which is why you're there in the first place, is asking questions, getting answers, getting help, et cetera, et cetera. So basically you're dealing with problems and solutions for your clients. So the ARRL terminology is tactical messages versus formal messages. And that's kind of parallel to what we're seeing here. Now, disasters can be either centralized or widespread. So a mass casualty incident, generally like a plane crash or a roller coaster fails, that's going to be fairly centralized, whereas earthquakes are the most common widespread events. I guess hurricanes would fit into that category. But an earthquake only lasts a few seconds, whereas a flood and a hurricane may linger for hours or days. And in the lower quadrant is a long-term hospital power outages. And hospitals don't like to lose power because you've got people on ventilators and all kinds of lab equipment that needs reliable power. So a disaster could have many sub-events where victims are scattered all over the neighborhood. So the severity of a disaster may be the sum of individual victim incidents. So when we have an earthquake, there may or may not be an incident command over the whole county, but each hospital in responding to incoming casualties is going to have an incident command in the hospital itself. And so if the phones are working and they have to talk to each other to get help or medications or something like that, they will just pick up the phone and dial the hospital. We don't have to be involved. But let's say that there is a plane crash and the incident is very specific, and casualties or injured parties are going to be distributed around the hospital network. That involves what we call the triage tag. And so the fire department, for first responders, will go through all the casualties that are laying there, and they will use this kind of tag to determine the priority and what should be done with each casualty. And if the default condition is that the victim is a minor casualty and they can wait while we take care of more severely injured. If we rip off the minor part, and there's perforations at the bottom of this form, then they are delayed. They'd probably get on the second ambulance going to a hospital. If we rip off the delayed, then the tag becomes an immediate. The first ambulance out, we want to get this patient on the way. We want to save their life. And of course, you rip off that, and then you say this patient isn't going to survive, so we're not going to. They're either dead or soon to be dead. We're not going to waste resources. That's the hard reality of triage, and firemen are taught to do this. So when a message that would go from the incident command to a hospital might be, we're sending you 2 immediates and 2 delayed. And that can be done over a digital network that's been around for 20 years. I don't know if they're still using it. Dennis may know, but the incident command has one of these terminals and can pass that along. Lateral messages can go through that to the Red Cross. We need we've received these 2 patients, and if it's sent over a digital network, there's some confidentiality that's preserved there. But and I had this happen at West Anaheim Hospital. They were getting in casualties from that train wreck, and one of the administrators was in the ER taking down all this data on a kind of a spreadsheet, and she hands me the spreadsheet and says, "Can you send this to the Red Cross over my voice radio channel?" And I looked at her and I said, yeah, I could, but it would take a long while, and we have some issues of confidentiality here. Is it really essential that this go over a radio channel? You've already written it out. Do you have a fax machine? Does the telephone network still work? Is there an alternate channel, such as a fax machine, or even if it's within the hospital, we call it sneaker wear. A runner will take a document from one department to another rather than send it over a 2-meter channel. So, and the same issue, if a hospital with the phones down needs a medication order from a physician and communicates to the physician's office, and are we ready to take the response? Do we have someone at the physician's office, or maybe the phones are still up at the physician's office? And so there are issues here of confidentiality. We're on an open channel. Anyone can listen in. And so, and there's little communication, to my knowledge, in amateur radio that's encrypted. So we have to assume that anyone can listen in to our communication. So when we send a request to a pharmaceutical warehouse, and that we worked with Bergen Brunswick on a lot of these drills, that request is probably not, it's probably not necessary to keep it confidential because we're not using a patient's name in that message. So the existing telephone network, you have multiple paths with simultaneous dialogues in full duplex. But if the entire PBX goes down and we have to do all this communication via amateur radio, we're going to have a hub and spoke situation with a net control. It's simpler technology. It can survive power outages and exchange failure, but it's very limited. So as I said before, if I'm sitting at hospital number 3, I'm hearing everything going on, and I eventually I'm getting a good picture of the whole county situation. But there may be messages I haven't heard because they did go through the phone system. So net control can be drawing, and here's where your net control has to be a fairly mature individual and stay calm and collected, drawing out the big picture from all parties. It's stressful when it's done right, and we discovered you can't be net control for more than 2 hours. You got to take a break. And because among other things, the net control must maintain situational awareness and often has to prioritize the messages. If you get several messages queued up and have to be read over the audio channel or 2 meters, then there's 2 kinds of information, the details and the summary. So when we're scoping out a disaster, and disaster assessment is one function that the Red Cross, it's a specialty. They have classes in it that they do. But before the Red Cross gets there, we may be in a position to see what's going on. And certainly do not rely on the broadcast media, because each observation of a sub-incident is anecdotal. And there may not be any common language or terminology or codes or metrics of severity of the damage or the number of casualties that we see observed. So I'm kind of negative about commercial news media. They're in for the audience and the revenue. So if it bleeds, it leads. And I've seen a lot of reporters just cathart on the air, and then they shove a microphone in the face of a man on the street to get their observations. And live on the scene may be still very ill-informed. And they emphasize speed over accuracy. And this was learned by FEMA. FEMA was watching CNN, and all the trucks were in Louisiana preparing for the oncoming hurricane, and they weren't in Homestead, Florida, where it already had pretty much decimated the town. So the disaster is where the news trucks are. And that's really an incorrect. So responsible reporting, my message to the news media is gather the observations off the air, have an editor sift through it, and then have someone in the studio just read what was written out. And the BBC does that very well. So information about the disaster, there may be many sub-incidences, photographs and human interest are all anecdotal. And they're almost always not actionable, but that's what the news media does. Whereas the summary information, the sum of all the observations, it should be management oriented, quantitative. It requires analysis, but we are facilitating a management decision by incident command or government authorities to respond appropriately and effectively to the situation. Photographs, we did a mass casualty drill up in Glendale at Nestle USA headquarters, about 300 volunteer casualties, but and all the participants, the responding fire departments and everybody had to pretend that they're not at the site yet, except for amateur TV, and they got there an hour early before the incident to set up their TV. Photographs can never summarize, and images can be emotionally distracting and hence misleading. So we have to understand the customers for the emergency communication we're providing. They're the people and institutions with the power to remedy the problem which created. So if your communication is not serving one of those customers, it may just be noise. The incident command, of course, is the authority empowered to resolve the crisis, usually government, often the fire department. And the challenge to us is understanding how big the incident is and how many victims, and clarifying damage assessment. So there are multiple components to damage assessment. Don't depend on a single channel. I've said this already. So invention is the mother of necessity. And back to the null condition. As nature abhors a vacuum, amateur radio culture abhors quiet frequencies. And so frequencies as a resource or channels tend to saturate, often we have found, with non-essential communication. But that's also true for commercial TV. Commentators feel that they have to keep talking. I remember that during the 1984 Olympic opening ceremonies. Just shut up and let me hear the music. But the difference between a radio technician and a communicator, and I may offend somebody with this slide, but many radio technicians focus on their equipment, whereas a good communicator has to be aware of the whole incident, focus on your customers. Situational awareness is very valuable. I could talk for an hour on that. Using good judgment and asking for channel resources, and recognize when a message is inappropriate for transmitting verbally on the radio, and maintaining good relations with your customers with whom you have eye contact. That's terribly important. You want to fit into a professional environment in the emergency room or in the hospital or wherever you're working. And I learned when I was sent up to Los Angeles and Red Cross headquarters after the Northridge quake, I learned to be a communicator and not take on ownership of a problem. Because once I took on ownership of a problem and tried to solve a problem that I really wasn't qualified to do, I lost my role. I was distracted from my role of maintaining high quality communication and being tuned into the the channel. So when we do damage assessment, it's what did you observe? When did you observe it? How many victims were involved? If we can do it offline or go to another channel, far better. So we're there to serve decision makers. Without the decision maker, the communication is rag chewing or noise. So you always have to keep in mind who are your decision makers, and it really depends on the size of the incident. So is amateur radio appropriate medium for a particular message? I'm starting to repeat myself, aren't I? What's the impact upon a casual listener? Could what you're saying be misinterpreted by that casual listener? And are there more suitable alternative communication channels? So data plus context equals information. Is the message relevant to a reasonably anticipated decision, or is it only cathartic? So we learned in the hospital, Orange County Hospital Disaster Support Communications System, to be a communicator, not a problem owner, and understand the difference. Don't dump information unless somebody really needs it or is ready to write it down. Don't cathart. Take a break from time to time. Distinguish cognitively between tactical and formal messages. Communication involves both the technical and the semantic components, and fascination with the technical risks missing the semantic elements. The more you know about the context and the content of a message, the better you are at error checking and the better you can serve your customers. Now that is really the end of this presentation, and I did it in under 53 minutes. Unless there's another reason to go back to a slide, I am going to stop sharing my screen so I can see the whole gang. And I will let the host figure out what we do now.
All right, what we do now is see if there's any questions. Most of you know down at the bottom of your Zoom screen is a thing where you can chat and put your questions in chat with a Q preceded by a Q, so we know it's a question, don't lose it. Or also at the bottom of your screen is a place that's reactions, and that's where you can raise your hand so we know you have a question or a comment to make.
And while I'm talking, I have not seen the chat window, so I had to focus on the slides.
Yeah, when you had your desktop going, you would not seeing that. Let's call on Oscar. He's got his hand up.
Oscar.
Michael, this is a fantastic presentation.
Thank you.
I wish I have, really, I wish I have saw it and learned from it before Hurricane Maria in Irma in 2017. We need to figure out during the force of 50 deployment and the local hams and the hospitals, all these needs during the actual catastrophe. It was a very broad catastrophe across the whole island, and no communication to the states, and even with the government having no communication as well. So definitely, this is something that should be part of training, and probably you should enhance not only the verbal communication, where it's really effective to be with the correct error correction, which is having digital communications. Doesn't matter if it's FM or WinLink in HF and so on, because when it gets really broad, you need that major communication. I'm just going to tell you that once we make an incident map of an assessment of the island through the ham radio across the event, we were directly invited to be directly inside EFS2, and we were active for more than 60 days over there for main communication. So definitely, I wish I had known all of this because it would make my life easy and all of us. This is something that should be a broad part of the training for any emergency response people. Thank you, Michael.
Well, thank you for those comments. This something I didn't emphasize. The Orange County group was constantly training. I think we had monthly or bi-monthly meetings, and we took an effort to know who our customers are before the incident. You don't want to have a disaster and you walk in and they look at you and they say, I don't know what you do. I've never seen you before. You don't want that situation. So you want to have a good relationship with all your potential customers, your fire department, your emergency services, or whatever the customers are. In the Indian Wells Valley, you probably also want to the sheriff and the CHP and such. You want to someone in your organization, and you have to be organized. This is not just a make it up as we go. Someone in your organization should be tasked with keeping those relationships alive and well. Other questions?
Someone wanted to know about standard forms.
Much of what we did in the hospital was we'd always bring a notebook, and they're gonna give you their message verbally, and you may write it down, but the essential elements of a message are who it's to, who it's from, and what the message is. We did not generally use the standard ARRL forms. That's not to say they can't be used, and in some situations they're more appropriate. But when you're standing there at the nurses' station, we're not going to ask them to fill out a form. They're busy, so they may verbally tell us what they need, what the message is, and we've got to fill in the text on our own. That's a different skill. That's why we do the preliminary or the training ahead of the incident for vocabulary and what happens in a hospital. We always encouraged our members to dress professionally, because you're going to be in a professional environment. You don't want to stick out like a sore thumb. I'm rambling here.
And that's what the NIMS ICS forms are for. You're probably going to be using a lot of ICS 213 message forms.
Okay.
And the difference between digital forms and written forms, like you say, where you have to write down and knowing the vocabulary is very important. I'm sure everybody on here has heard my story about there was a shelter that was looking for chapstick for a lot of their clients. So they ordered 100 vials of chapstick. Somehow the person transcribed it and they couldn't figure out why they got 100 pairs of chopsticks.
Oh dear.
The difference of one letter.
Well, and
different vocabulary.
Over a noisy channel.
It's right. That's right.
Yeah, over a noisy channel, they may be confused.
That's right. So that's why it's very important to have some kind of error correction when that happens.
Right.
No
other questions?
Dan. No other questions in the chat, Dan. Larry has his hand up.
Okay, Larry.
Yeah, I was the one that broached the question on the forums, because I've noted that a lot of times if it's not written down, it didn't exist. It didn't happen. I've been in a number of instances where I was being questioned by the authority, and later on I go, well, here's a copy of the forms. Here's the copies of the messages. Here's the copies of my logs. And that immediately shut down a lot of the speculation on why something didn't get passed. So I think writing everything down is very essential.
Oh, I agree. And one of the challenges is if you're standing at a nurse's station and you're holding a handheld, you only have one hand left for a tablet and a pen to write things down. It's far better to be seated somewhere where you can put down the handheld. And by the way, we found that the ducks don't propagate as well as the long antennas on 2 meters. And by the way, 2 meters is difficult around some buildings, and 220 worked even better, or 440. But yes, you want to, and then there's a documentation approach to the net control. Net control needs to be constantly logging, and we learned never to write on the back side of a piece of paper, because you're going to lay them out and you don't want to have to turn something over. Where did that message come? When did that message come in? So everybody should be logging as the incident goes ahead. Yeah, some agencies do have variations of their forms. I'm not seeing the chat window, so I'll let Dennis or the host. I see another hand, Lee.
Yeah, well, Lee, I don't see Lee, but I do see Tom.
Okay,
Go
Tom.
ahead.
Yeah, since you couldn't see the chat window, I wrote an example of one of those things where the abbreviation doesn't mean what they think it means. I was taking notes for a paramedic. As the paramedic reeled them off in his patient examination, the granddaughter's standing right beside me and can see what I'm writing, and I write down SOB. And she says, I know granddad can be a little difficult,
Yeah.
but that's uncalled for.
That's
And I
shortness of
replied,
breath.
short of breath, ma'am. It means short of breath.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
Lee, you got your hand up.
Yeah. Hey, Michael, can you speak briefly to, or do you have any tricks for numbering your 213s?
Okay. I presume I haven't done this in 18 years, because I moved away from Orange County 18 years ago, and we don't have any comparable disaster group here in the San Bernardino area. But so I can't speak to forms that sounds like many of you are familiar with.
Or just any of your, do you have any tricks to how you keep your messages numbered?
Well, does the numbering have to be unique across the entire network, or is it just unique to within one location?
Right. Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, that kind of answers my question. That's how you guys did it.
Well, I don't remember that we used numbering of messages very much, but in fact, mostly we were doing a lot of that on the fly. I don't think we had an incident that lasted longer than 6 hours because you're in an urban area.
Gotcha.
I see a hand and it keeps moving around. Oscar again.
Yeah, Ali, the way we did it in Puerto Rico, we put the year, month, day, and hour.
As a
that
prefix.
gives you immediately the number, and it's an increasing number all the time. Again,
Gotcha.
Year, month, day, and hour, time, I mean, and that'll give you one single message. It cannot be duplicated. Even 1 minute is enough to be a second message. And then already give you the time of when that message came to, for example, kilowatt Michael or something like that at the main station. So that's the way it was numbered.
That's how you guys did it. All right. Thanks.
Now I see other hands, but is that his hand still up? Go ahead.
Well, you know, you're talking about numbering your messages. You can do all kinds of elaborate systems, but what I always try to get my team to do is at least put their initial someplace within it. I prefer the date and time. But if you look at your messages, the standard messages always has a time when you're transmitting it plus the date. That's what I was saying about forms. There's a lot of forms out there. If you stick with the basic FEMA forms, you'll be able to keep track of just about everything going, because you're going to be logging your messages on a log form, and then you have a general form of your basic communications. It's a bit cumbersome, but it sure saves you a lot of headache when somebody starts accusing, well, you guys didn't send that message through.
Now, is the number of the message part of what you say over the air?
Negative.
Okay.
But that is your information. Now you can come back and say, at 1845, I got a message from, and then you can go back and say, oh yeah, that's what this was. But you don't need to know, they don't need to know. You don't want to pass a ton of information over there. You just want to give them the message. The to, the from, and what have you.
You want to be efficient. Absolutely. Tom.
One thing about the more recent FEMA paradigm reinforces what Larry said earlier, to write everything down, but also to know to get copies of your messages, especially if they ordered resources through your message. They asked for something. You don't care whether they got it or not. Get that message to finance when you close up. That message is how they're going to be reimbursed, because the person who sent the message either is or is not authorized to order that. It's not your concern. You get the message to finance and let them figure it out.
Okay, and that's the finance department of the government agency that you are supporting, right?
That or the finance office within your organization, not the agency. Finance is a part of the incident command system. It's their problem to get it to the right agency and so forth. But as long as you get it to them, you've done your job and you're innocent.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Can I say one more thing?
Larry.
Yes, sir. San Bernardino, where I'm in the next county over, they do have a, I don't know where in San Bernardino you are, but up in the high desert area, they do have quite a few of active people with different forms. So you can talk to the people on Table Mountain if you're on one side of the rocks, and they could probably plug you into an Aries group or similar.
Yeah, I'm in Loma Linda. In fact, I teach at the university, and I am in the hospital frequently. But I don't know. It takes. I think sometimes rural areas are better at organizing amateur radio support than urban areas. That's because we don't have. There used to be an amateur radio group with the fire department here in Loma Linda, but they haven't called a meeting in maybe 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, and I understand that.
So it's both the perception of the risk or the likelihood of needing all this, plus the culture of the government employees like the fire department. Do they really appreciate what we're going to do in an urban area? Maybe not. Up there in Ridgecrest, I bet they take you seriously.
I don't know if you've ever been involved in Victorville, which is your
yeah, it's still over
San
the
Bernardino
hill.
County.
It's still over the hill. Yeah.
I think maybe we've been in contact with them. We're massaging our friendship
I'd like
there.
to interject here and move on if we can. Barry, are there any more questions in the chat?
Nope, we're good in the chat.
Okay. And I don't see hands up. So, let me tell you this, after I close out these meetings, just check back in. You can sit and talk to each other and share experiences like any club meeting or whatever. So after I close it out, just come back in and I'll leave it open for a while for that to happen.
Okay, there's still some donuts at the back of the room.
Okay. I like it.
Somebody ate all the chocolate squirrels.
All right. With that, I think I'm going to close this out, and hopefully I'll get that your spreadsheet in PDF or whatever, so we can get that out there. And we'll. I enjoyed your presentation. It's a very good one, and judging from the comments in the chat session, everybody enjoyed it. Really appreciate
Thank you.
it.
It's been a while.
Very
Thank
educational.
Michael,
Thank you.
thank you so much. It was great to have you here. I'm glad you were able to do this. This is awesome. It's good to see you. It's been a long time.
About 3 years since I did
Yeah.
the material.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was good to see you.
It's great to be seen.
There's a
Well,
lot
thank you again.
about that, especially these days. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate your time. And this is Thursday, so we'll probably see you all next Wednesday for the next presentation. And 73s to everybody.
7-3 to everybody. Thank you all for coming.
7-3, everybody.
7
Good night.
threes. Thanks for the class.
Good.
Thanks for the donuts.